21 days to create a habit is fake news. It takes much longer. And today we want to talk about not only how we've all been duped by this whole 21-day rule, but how long it really takes to form long-lasting habits. Because if you're a woman over 40, I would assume that you don't have time to be doing arbitrary behaviors for 21 days or 30 days or whatever the case may be, only to have all of the results reverse on you the second that you stop doing them. So, how long does it really take to create a habit? Let's talk a little bit about that. First and foremost, it's important to understand like where did this 21-day thing even come from? And word on the street is that in the 60s, there was a plastic surgeon who studied his patients and found that it took them about 21 days to adapt to their new look post-surgery. Somewhere along the line, that became an adaptation to how long it takes everyone on the planet to adapt to anything, to form a habit, basically, which is not what the actual science shows. So, as it tends to be, like usually there's something that's done, it's taken out of context, and then it's just like purported all over the place. And then next thing you know, we're all doing 21-day challenges and 30-day boot camps and all those things. And wondering why we keep falling off of every like fad or challenge or whatever the thing is. So, as science tends to do, the actual research shows that there's a bit more nuance to habit building. And that means that it's a little bit more complex and individualized than the 21-day rule would make it seem. So that's important to know that usually once you bring science in, there's not going to be a clear-cut answer. So that's kind of the frustration of it, which I get because as somebody who's like doing videos like this and I'm talking to the general public versus when I'm doing one-to-one stuff and talking to my personal clients, they're going to get the more individualized thing because I'm only talking to them. I don't have to consider anybody else's like approach or background or any of those things. But when you're talking to a more general audience, then you're going to have to generalize things a little bit more and or share all of these little nuanced things to it, which can irritate people if they want you to just hurry up and get to the point, right? So it's important to understand that habit formation and what it takes for you to create a new habit is going to be individualized to you and what the habit is that you're doing and your background. So let's talk a little bit more about how that looks. So we've all heard the idea that it takes 21 days to create a habit. Well, that sounds simple and it's very encouraging, right? It gets us to do something for 21 days, which side note, if you're somebody who does something for 21 days straight, that is not something to knock because that is actually putting you closer to creating a habit. It's just nothing magical happens at the 21-day mark to make it a habit. But as simple and encouraging as that is, that number has this whole crazy background to it, right? That means nothing to us unless we're somebody who's like, oh, I just got surgery and it's going to take me about 3 weeks to adjust to this new face. Now, if you're not that person and you're like, okay, but I really do want to like change my behaviors and start doing all these new things and adapt a new lifestyle, and it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. I want to change my physique. I want to transform. Like when it comes to transformation and transformative behaviors, the actual science shows that it can take anywhere from 18 days, yay, right, to 254 days. What? That's like 8.5 months. 254 days, 8.5 months. So, why is there such a big spread there? That's the key, is that everything in between there is the nuance. That's where we have to start looking at how complex is the behavior, how long have you been executing the opposite of that behavior, how long, like if you're trying to break a habit, how long have you been doing that? That's why we're also looking at like, how old you are and stuff like that. That's the reason why I said this is something that women over 40 really have to take into consideration because of the fact that you may have 4 to 5 decades under your belt of doing something one way. 21 days is not going to make you start suddenly doing it the other way. So when we look at the studies that are done on habits and there being an 18-day habit that's formed and a 254-day habit that's formed, it's the complexity that determines the difference. So that 18-day person was, they're doing habits like drinking more water, flossing your teeth, stuff like that. Things that like aren't really significant in the grand scheme and they're not very complex. But when we're talking about changing diet behaviors and transforming your old diet mentality, like if you have decades of diet culture and fad diets and quick fixes and all of these things under your belt, and you're trying to change that mindset and you're trying to switch and start doing these things that are going to be more beneficial to you, like eating more food, eating more protein, eating more fiber, lifting weights and focusing more on your muscle and things like that. Those are going to be a little bit more complex because the other side is so deeply ingrained. So the more complex the behavior, the longer it's going to take. So something simple, drinking water, flossing, something like that is going to be on the quicker side. Something more fundamental to you, to your identity, to the way that you've been engaging with food and your body for decades is going to require a little more patience, a little more persistence, a little more grace on, for the way that you've been up until now. So when we look at that broad spectrum of the 18 to 254 days, the average for that study's participant was around 66 days. If we even start to have that perspective of instead of starting on that short end with the 66 days, with the 21 days, if we were to even start at that 66-day point, it would at least get us a little bit more committed to the thing that we're doing and a little bit greater of an understanding of what something might require from us. So that would be the first thing, is like if you're able to first have that shift of, okay, this is going to take a little bit longer before it's a habit. It's going to take a little bit longer than 21 days. That's already a great start as far as mindset shift is concerned. The next thing is to recognize, like, okay, now complexity wise, where is it putting me on that spectrum? And complexity, I want you to think of complexity not so much as just like how complex the one behavior is, but how complex are you making it? So let's say that you need to like start on this lifestyle where you're going to heal your metabolism and start losing fat again. Like you're trying to reset your metabolism, build some lean mass, and then start losing fat. If you look at the episode that I did on no nonsense fat loss, like we break down like just 3 to 4 main behaviors that you need to do. And that's the reason for that, is because if you're tackling this as this huge complex thing you need to do, and you're doing more and more research for how to do the thing, and it's like, okay, and I want to have X amount of protein and X amount of carbs, and how do I do this with fat? That's the reason why I'm like, focus on your protein and then let the carbs and fat fall where they are, then focus on fiber, focus on lifting, like taking those things one at a time makes it less complex, which makes it easier to create a habit around it. If you want to pile on behaviors, you are making the entire situation more complex, which means it's going to take longer. It's going to take you longer to execute 5 new behaviors for a certain amount of days, and that's going to be more complex. That's going to be a more significant change because that's actually changing who you are than it is to implement one change over 66 days or 75 days, 100 days, 254 days. So you want to start looking at the things that you want to tackle from that frame of reference. How complex is it? How long have I been doing it? How complex am I making it? Like maybe it's not complex, but I'm adding complexity to it. And give yourself more than enough time. Like you may be that person, you're like, I want to go all in. I want to make all the behavior changes all at once. Great, wonderful. Are you willing to give yourself 254 days? If that feels like it's too much, then maybe start removing some of those behaviors and decide. What I usually recommend is to decide if you want to snowball it or domino it. So the difference between the two is the snowball is, if you ever like heard of like Dave Ramsey or anybody like that, like where they talk about when you have a lot of debt, you can, instead of attacking like the biggest credit card first, which may make you feel overwhelmed and like you may feel like you're just chipping away and not getting there, then you start with like you pay off the smallest card, and then once that's paid off, like yay, you get a win, you feel accomplished, you like are starting that snowball, you have a little bitty ball, and now you can take the payment that you were using from that card and you apply it to paying down the next one. And you just keep doing that until you slowly get to the bigger card. So that's the snowball. Again, this isn't a financial lesson, but it's to show you like that if you're that type of person that you get motivated from like all of these like little small wins adding up to the big win, then start there. Make the starting behavior as small as possible so that it takes the smaller amount of time to implement. So it's more on the 18-day side than the 254-day side. And then once that's a habit, then you add on the next thing. Once that's a habit, you add on the next thing. Now, you could do that, but you want to recognize that like you're going to have to keep each behavior as you add on the new thing. So make sure they're actually really small, not just telling yourself that they're small because you want to start with a smaller amount of time. Or you can do the domino effect. And this is something that I often encourage, even though for a lot of people, it can feel demotivating. So like you have to know yourself. And if that's something that's going to demotivate you, is to start with the big things, the big items, picking one of those like that's going to make the most impact and giving that your all and giving yourself enough time to get it down, because you know that once you get it down, like it's going to knock everything else down. So that one's going to domino. So pick your side. Are you a snowballer or are you a domino person? I personally love to domino, but I am somebody who's like willing to put in the time. It's like, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to give myself the year to do it. So that means that I'm probably going to cross that 254-day mark. That might not feel good to somebody else. So this is why mindset is always going to be key. You want to know yourself, especially, we're grown with it. So we're talking about somebody who's 45, 50, 55 years old. Like, you know yourself enough to know, like, am I going to get demotivated by doing this thing for X amount of time, or will I be super motivated because once I get it down, like it's going to change so many other things that it's worth it to put in the time. Now, either way, the things are still going to, you're either waiting for the little things to add up or you're waiting for enough time of doing something consecutive for the domino thing to add up, for it to start pushing the other dominoes over. Either way, the important part is understanding that time factor and recognizing that if you're adding on behaviors, if you're making something more complex than it is, which a lot of diets tend to do today, they give you 12 different rules that you have to execute from day one. That is not going to be sustainable for you for this reason. That's why when we're talking about sustainability, you want to take the habit piece into consideration, because when you're in your 40s and 50s and beyond, your metabolism, your hormones, your decades of diet culture and fat dieting and all those things make the behaviors more complex. They make the changes more significant. And those are the two biggest factors in how long it's going to take you to change. The more significant the changes, the more complex the behavior is, the longer it will change. The more you're on the 254-day end of the spectrum, the more we're talking about, are you willing to dedicate 6 months or more to doing this thing, to making it a habit? And if it almost helps if you just start looking at every habit from that perspective, because then it will help you to move into that no nonsense zone. It will help you to decide whether or not this is something that is worth it. Like if this is going to take me, if this one thing is going to take me almost a year before it's a habit, is it really worth it? It makes you start like shedding some of those little insignificant things that when we're caught up in diet mentality, we're like, oh, and I want to do this and I want to watch this little thing and I want to add that and remove this, and you start removing and nitpicking at little things that make something more complex, which means it's going to make it take longer for it to work. So when you're trying to retrain your body and retrain these deeply rooted behaviors, they're going to require consistency, they're going to require persistence, and they're going to require patience. So give yourself the time by picking needle moving behaviors as much as possible. When you have those needle moving behaviors and you're taking that into consideration and like, okay, it's going to take me a long time. And even if it only takes me the 66 days, you want to remember that we're talking about consecutive days here too. So that will really make you rethink your approach as well. We're not just talking about 66 days passing and maybe you did the thing intermittently for like 3 days here, 4 days here, 2 days here, with breaks of 3 to 4 days in between. We're talking about consistently. So that means like hold yourself accountable, like have some way of tracking that behavior to see if you're actually doing it for the right amount of time. That way, when you fall off of the behavior for a day or two, you're actually calling yourself out about it. So this is definitely something that, like I said, it brings more nuance to it because of the fact that think about it when you're talking about something that you're going to do like a couple days a week or 3 days a week, like working out, that makes it a little bit harder because now you're not doing it consecutive days, which means that that whole thing could take longer than you're planning on it. So sometimes it helps to start with something that you're doing daily before once it's a habit and established, then breaking it up into something that maybe you're only doing like a couple times per week or something like that. So when it comes to exercise, if you're not exercising at all, you might be better off starting off trying to exercise every day until you get to that whatever 66-day mark, 100-day mark, 254-day mark, and then breaking it up. And I'm not saying exercise like every day for like 30 minutes to an hour. Like, can you do 5 minutes a day every day for 66 days? Can you do 10 minutes a day every day for 66 days? And then, like, once you get to the point where you're doing that consistently, then you can start tweaking the different things within the workout, if that makes any sense. So, you want to include your slip ups in that tracking. That's the reason why you want to actually like pinpoint it and track it. And as always, these are the things that seem very tedious to us when we have like such busy lives, but they're the things that make the difference. So when you see that like 21 days to habit, make a habit, 90 days to make a lifestyle, or whatever the memes say, like when you see those things, like I want you to just like put on the blinders and remember to yourself, like, or at very least say 66 days, like just start retraining your mind as far as how long something's going to take you, say like 66 to 254 days or 100 days or something like that. Like start thinking in longer terms, but also stop applying those to like overhaul changes. Remember, we're just talking about like small minute changes. So like each individual piece of that puzzle is its own habit. So hopefully that helps you. I just don't want you to ever feel like you failed something if you like did something for 21 days and then you went back to your old ways afterwards. You were supposed to. It was only 21 days. 21 days is not significant. Nothing special happens at the 21-day mark other than the fact that maybe you're close to a third of the way to 66 days. So give yourself time day after day after day. Keep showing up. Master the art of just showing up for yourself for as long as it takes to get the result, because the point of all of this is to become the woman who has the results in the end. It's not just to get the results, it's to become the woman who gets to keep the results. And the only way to do that is by shifting your habits and the things that you do all the time, which means it has to become who you are, because you get results from who you are, not just what you do, because what you do can shift at any minute. So hopefully that helped you. If this is something that you want to go deeper in, I highly recommend the Crush the Diet course, because that's where I'm talking about all about like mindset and mentality and all these little micro shifts that we have to unlearn and make mentally, as far as being able to like really tackle these results, because it's not about just having a perfect plan and knowing what to do. It's about, like I said, becoming that person, and that's where you can make those identity shifts. So Crush the Diet course is the diet mindset course that will help you to overcome this. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes, as well as I recommend checking out the book by Charles Duhigg on the power of habit. That's where he talks a little bit more about this 18 to 254 day thing, but also gives you lots of tips there as far as how to create habits. So that's another inexpensive way to start if you are DIYing it. I highly recommend both, because of the fact the more resources that you have when you are DIYing and the more resources that you have and act on, the better. So thank you guys for joining, and I will see you in the next one.